Hi everyone, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn, and together with chesslecture.com I'd like to welcome you to today's video. So today I want to share with you a very nice miniature that I played recently at a tournament called Golden State Open in California against an expert, and I was really familiar with the ideas of this opening because I studied the classics. Specifically, I will be referring to the game played by Bobby Fischer against Fischer-Petrosian way back in the day. I believe it was from 1970 when the game was played. So after the moves e4, c6, d4, d5, I chose to play the exchange variation of the Caro-Kann. This is the opening that I like because it immediately establishes the pawn structure, and this is also the recommended opening in my book that I co-authored with Jinjin Albert called Chess Openings Explained for White. So I played the move bishop d3. It's very important that you start with this bishop move immediately. Why? Because if you play, for instance, c3, trying to establish this beautiful pawn chain, that actually allows the bishop to come to f5, and your advantage is pretty much gone. It's very important to not trade the bishops. This is basically black's dream position because white obviously, the plan is try to attack on the king side. Without that bishop, your attack loses most of its venom, and black is simply going to execute minority attack once he finishes development. So this is something that I really have to avoid, trade of light square bishops. So this is the predominant theme of this variation. So bishop d3, knight c6, hitting my pawn, c3, knight f6, bishop f4. So it's not advisable for black to play this move e6 for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. The bishop is going to be completely stuck. White's going to have beautiful attack on this diagonal. That's why most chess players play bishop to g4. Queen b3, immediately posing problems on the queen side. So black has several ways to defend the pawn. My opponent plays knight to a5. I should mention that the more popular ways are queen c8 or even queen d7, after which white develops naturally and the game is sort of only beginning. There's still a lot of fight left. White is fighting for the outpost. Black, on the other hand, is trying to neutralize the light square bishop with a possible bishop h5, bishop g6 idea. But knight a5 is a very old idea. This move was played by none other than former world champion Fischer-Petrosian against Bobby Fischer, and Fischer played queen a4 check. It turns out that it's actually not very easy for black to block from this check. Knight c6 simply loses time, so this is just a bad move. Queen d7 is awful because it drops the knight. Knight d7 sort of neglects development altogether. And bishop d7, not a move you want to play, is black's best choice because black is actually hitting the queen. I played queen c2, and my opponent played move rook c8, immediately creating pressure on the c file, pinning the pawn. And the ideas that kind of stemmed from the Fischer-Petrosian game, let me share that with you first, actually started after the move c6. This is the move played by Petrosian, and basically the idea here is that he's going to try to develop while trading the bishop on b5. And for instance, knight f3, queen b6, if white is not careful in castles, then black executes the whole point of this variation. The bishops will get traded, and white's attack pretty much comes to an end. You cannot really checkmate the king after bishop e7 castles without the light square bishop, and black will regroup and eventually start pushing the pawns, typical minority attack. So this is something that you have to know if you play this line, to not allow this. So how would Fischer, do you think, reply when somebody plays like Petrosian queen b6? And the move here is very important You have to stop bishop b5. Let's see if you can find it. And for those of you who saw the a4 idea, you are correct. This is the simple way to stop bishop b5. Knight b3 is not something that you're afraid of, because after rook a2, this knight doesn't really have a lot of squares it can go to, and eventually you will either trade it off with knight bd2 or play around it, followed by the kingside attack. And I believe Petrosian played rook c8, and then after knight bd2, maybe knight c6 was the idea, to try to play knight b4, another trap using the pin. But after a logical move queen b1, the counterplay by black is pretty much halted. Black can't attack anything else. And this position is completely fine for white. White is ready to castle, play knight e5, and eventually Fischer got a dream position. This bishop never got out. So this game had a big impact on me, and I knew the ideas from this game, and that is why I really encourage everybody to study the classics, because you never know when an idea will be useful for you in your tournament. So let's get back to my game. So how does this all relate to my game? Well, my opponent plays rook c8, I played knight f3, he played g6. Slightly different move than Petrosian, but I was already thinking about how to meet queen b6. Obviously a4 is the typical reaction. So I castle for now. Queen b6 easily could be met by a4, something that I'm not worried about. And he plays bishop to g7. So he is keeping his eyes open. He may try to get the bishop to b5, or he may even, at the right moment, try to trade the bishop on f5 if my queen leaves c2 square. I played h3. This is called a prophylactic move. The reason is, if knight h5, I get the h2 square for my bishop, and it's a useful move as well. b5, so he is definitely going for the minority attack. The idea is to play b4 and really pose some problems for my queen side. It's very important that you don't allow easy counterplay for black. Queen e2 does exactly that. Notice that I take control of the b5 pawn, so this pawn is under attack, while putting extra pressure against the pawn on e7. So what to do? He plays queen b6. This is a logical move, and I simply finish development with knight bd2. Once again, black has not solved the problem of the light square bishop. So here my opponent had an interesting choice. He played knight c4. I'm not quite sure if I like that move, to be honest with you. But an interesting decision he could have tried is to castle. And if I take the pawn, he actually does get some counterplay with the move rook to e8. I wasn't sure if I was going to take that pawn during the game. And funny enough that after knight c4, I don't really want to take this knight, because, well, not only does he have this option to put pressure on my pawn, this is the real threat, and then he can use the d5 outpost for the knight. Instead, I immediately seize control over the c5 outpost with knight b3. Notice that c4 is a relative outpost. It's not really outpost, I can kick the knight, whereas c5 is an absolute outpost. So bishop f5. He finally achieved the strategy of this variation, trading light square bishops. But at a price. So after I take, he took with the pawn. There is one move that really questions black's setup. Let's see if you can find it. If you need more time, go ahead and pause the video. And I'm going to give you a little hint. Black managed to trade the bishops at a cost. Double pawns, and moreover, he hasn't castled yet. He is one move away from completing development. So logical move like rook e1, e6, followed by castle, doesn't really give white much. because black is going to finish development. Obviously, white still has some squares he can work with, but it's not going to be easy to go after the king. But here, white has a very simple idea to his disposal. Let's see if you can find it again, if you had more time and didn't see it. And the move is knight h4. This kind of awkward knight move is deadly. There is absolutely no way black can save his position now. My opponent panics and basically falls apart in 2 moves. He played e6. Obviously, allowing knight takes f5 is bad, but he didn't see anything else. He castled and blundering the exchange. And after knight takes c8, I managed to win the game rather easily. But before we go further, let's go back a little bit to see if we can find a better defense for black. So obviously pawn's under attack. The move that I was calculating during the game was the move queen e6. So if you saw knight h4, you had to also foresee how to answer queen e6. The logical move is to take, double the pawns, and to attack the pawn right away runs into a very simple problem. King f7, and if you keep attacking, rook c6, everything is under defense here, and this pawn is under attack. Looks like you ran out of attacking ideas. White's still probably better. You can play b3, knight back, try to use the squares, but there is a much better way to get an advantage. And after queen e6, move rook a to e1 exclam, forcing the swap of queens. This is a big threat, so is this, because of e7. And after queen takes, rook takes, notice that black doesn't have easy way of protecting the pawn. Again, e6 runs into simply knight takes f5 using the pin. Knight d6 simply fails due to bishop takes knight. The only active move that black has is to counterplay by hitting the bishop. And now, very nice move, bishop g5, pointing out that not so fast, my friend. You still have a weakness there. And after f6, I have a pleasant choice. Simply drop it back, leaving black with a terrible pawn. If f4, knight f5, everything is collapsing. So this is probably just losing. Another idea that I was also thinking about is simply to sacrifice this bishop. Knight takes, takes, check, and play in this position, which obviously I have a huge advantage. I can even take the pawn. But I don't probably need any of this stuff if bishop c1 works too. So the lesson here is, even if you execute the strategy of the opening, you have to be careful about tempos. Usually, when you fall for a miniature, there is a very specific kind of mistake that you make. If you fall for a miniature and you lose quickly, usually you failed to develop your pieces and castle in time. That's usually what the miniature stands for. So anyways, let's see how the game finished. So I started by taking the pawn, grabbed the exchange. By the way, I was actually considering taking the bishop and just going after the king, which is a very nice alternative. But of course, why not to get greedy and get a free exchange? And how would one win this position? I'm exchange up, plus the extra pawn. Very simple. All I need to do is get the knight into the game, and I immediately seize that moment. Knight c5. I'm not really aiming to leave the knight on c5. I'm actually trying to transfer the knight here, and eventually to e5. This is the winning square. He plays rook g8. Notice there are no threats. Knight d3, knight e4. And I'm not afraid of anything, so I just kick the knight back with f3. The sacks on d4 don't work. If he takes, takes, queen takes, check, I can simply move my king out of the way. Absolutely no threats. So he played knight back. Now b3. He realized that this knight will have to go back, and then I can mount either the bishop or knight on e5 and just have absolutely counter-free sort of winning advantage. So my opponent simply resigned. So wow, 24 move miniature, and all because my opponent was blindly following very specific strategy, trying to trade those light square bishops. He eventually did it on f5, but at the cost of time. And knight h4 was the refutation of his plan, and therefore his whole setup doesn't really make a lot of sense. And it really helped that I knew about Fischer-Petrosian idea, because if he ever played queen b6, I have this a4 move, and he never has a chance to trade those light square bishops. So study your classics, pay attention to the tempi, and most important, don't just blindly follow one specific idea. Try to really understand whether or not it works. Thank you very much. This was Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn for ChessLecture.com. Goodbye.